In the deepest shadows of Titan's fortress-monastery, where the air tastes of sanctified ozone and the echo of chanting servitors rolls like thunder through endless halls of silver, there is a silence that even demons fear. It is said that every gray knight dreams of the warp, though they are trained to resist its whispers since birth. But dreams are treacherous things, reflections of memory and sin. And even purity, when pressed beneath the weight of eternity, begins to fracture. Imagine standing within the glow of a dying star, hearing the screams of 1,000 worlds carried by the psychic winds of the Imperium. Imagine knowing that your every breath is a weapon of faith, yet your soul trembles beneath what it has seen. This is the truth unspoken among the Grey Knights, that nightmares are not born of weakness, but of witnessing too much. They are visions carved into the flesh of memory, reminders that even those forged without fear cannot escape the echoes of the warp. For what else could haunt the Emperor's most flawless sons, but the reflection of what they were created to destroy? So let us descend now into the haunted silence of Titan, into the mind of a warrior whose dreams bleed with holy fire and warp-born screams. This is not the story of victory, nor of defeat, but of endurance, of what it means to gaze into the abyss, and find the abyss gazing back through your own sanctified eyes. The fortress monastery of Titan stood shrouded in mist, its silhouette carved from myth and stormlight. To those who gazed upon it from orbit, it seemed less a structure than a wound in reality, an island of steel and sanctity suspended between the void and the warp. Inside, the air was heavy with incense and the faint static hum of psychic wards woven into every wall. The sound of chanting echoed endlessly, a chorus of deep mechanized voices reciting liturgies so ancient their meanings had long since blurred into rhythm and intent. The words themselves no longer mattered, only their weight did. Brother-Captain Alaric Kael moved through the sanctified corridors in silence. His armor, polished to mirror brightness, still bore the faint tracery of runes scorched by demonic fire. Every step he took sent soft reverberations through the marble floors, each echo swallowed by the fortress as though Titan itself drank the sound. Around him, servitors glided on mechanical limbs, their faces pale and featureless beneath rusted halos of augmetic circuitry. They tended to censers of burning myrrh, releasing clouds of pale smoke that coiled like restless spirits through the air. He had not spoken since the campaign on Belizer IV, a world once writhing under the taint of the warp, now reduced to sanctified ash. It had been a victory, or so the Ordo Malleus declared. But victory had never felt so hollow. Too many of his brothers had been reclaimed by the void, their names sealed in record vaults where even remembrance was forbidden. Kael himself had survived the final exorcism only by emptying his mind of all thought, channeling the Emperor's light through sheer will until the world itself broke beneath the strain. Now, in the quiet aftermath, he felt something left behind, not within the world, but within himself. The rites of cleansing were meant to burn such residue away. He had endured them for 3 days beneath the supervision of the sacristans, kneeling in chambers flooded with sanctified light, as relics hummed around him like silent witnesses. They had bathed his armor in the oils of St. Gerak, his weapons re-anointed in molten silver drawn from the moon's veins. His body was cleansed, his mind purged, and yet something had not left him. Each time the hymns began, a second sound rose beneath them, a tremor, a whisper, a breath that did not belong to the living. It began in the refectory, where the knights ate in solemn silence before prayer. The walls there were lined with golden aquili, their wings spread in eternal benediction. He had bowed his head as the chaplain's voice rolled through the chamber, words of praise offered to the Emperor's endless vigilance. But halfway through the litany, Kael's gaze drifted toward the vaulted ceiling. The candles flickered, the air thickened, and for a fleeting instant, he thought he heard someone whisper his name. He had turned sharply, but no one spoke. His brothers remained motionless, their faces unreadable beneath their helms. The chaplain continued the benediction undisturbed, his crozius raised high. Yet the whisper returned, faint as the brush of breath against glass. Kael, he told himself it was the echo of his own thought. But the human mind, even one forged through psychic conditioning, recognizes the tone of something that is not itself. That night, when he returned to his cell, the whisper followed him. It did not speak words. It sang low and mournful, a hymn twisted backward through memory. His chamber was austere, a narrow cot, a desk of ceramite bearing a single data slate, and a small shrine carved from meteoric stone. Upon it rested a sigil of the Emperor, its edges worn smooth by countless years of touch. Kael knelt before it, removing his helm and setting it upon the floor. The air was cold against his scarred skin. He bowed his head and began the prayer of vigilance. His lips moved, but the words came hollow. Through the light of the Emperor, I am made pure. Through purity, I am made strong. Through strength, I shall cast out. The whisper cut through the prayer like a blade. Your own reflection. His eyes snapped open. The candle flame before him trembled violently, then steadied. The room was still. The only sound was the faint mechanical ticking of the chronometer embedded in the wall. And yet his heart thundered in his chest like a distant drum. He rose slowly, scanning the corners of the chamber. Nothing. No sign of intrusion, no trace of psychic disturbance. Yet he knew what he had heard. For the first time since his initiation on Titan, Alaric Kael felt the chill of uncertainty. He reported to the reclusium the next morning. The chaplain's armor was black and gold, his skull helm gleaming beneath the torchlight. He listened without expression as Kael described the whisper, his hands resting upon the haft of his Crozius. When Kael finished, the chaplain inclined his head. Dreams and echoes are common after war in the warp, he said at last. They are remnants of perception, not corruption. But if you doubt your purity, you must submit to testing. Kael nodded, though something in the chaplain's tone unsettled him. Submission meant the mindscry, a psychic examination that could strip one's soul bare. Few emerged from it unchanged. But he accepted because doubt was more dangerous than any demon. The chamber of testing lay deep beneath the fortress, beyond sealed adamantium doors guarded by silent custodians of the watch. Inside, the air hummed with restrained energy. A circle of runes had been carved into the floor, each glowing faintly with psychic flame. At its center stood a single seat of black stone. He sat. The interrogator entered, a librarian of the Third Brotherhood, his eyes hidden behind a silver visor. Without a word, the librarian raised his staff, and the runes began to flare. Kael felt the air tighten around him, pressing like invisible hands against his skull. His thoughts unfolded under the psychic probe, his memories laid bare like pages of an open tome. He saw the fields of Belizer IV, burning with warp fire. He saw the demon prince he had slain, its body dissolving into nothingness as he struck the killing blow. He saw his brothers falling, their armor cracking beneath impossible force. Then, beneath all that, the librarian saw something else. A flicker of movement in the shadow of Kael's mind. A shape that did not belong. The librarian's voice came as a whisper inside his thoughts. "What is this?" Kael tried to answer, but no words formed. The shape stirred. For an instant, he glimpsed a face. His own, half buried in darkness, lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. Then the psychic pressure shattered. Kael gasped, clutching his temples. The chamber's lights dimmed, runes flickering weakly. The librarian staggered backward, blood trickling from beneath his visor. "Enough," he hissed. "The test is inconclusive." Inconclusive, a word that carried more fear than condemnation. The chaplain ordered Kael to meditate within isolation for 7 days, a standard penance for those touched by doubt. Yet Kael knew this was not doubt. The thing within him was real, and it was waiting. That night, as he sat cross-legged upon the cold stone floor of his chamber, his eyes closed, his breathing measured, he heard it again. The whisper had grown stronger, more defined. "You can't cleanse what was never pure." Kael's hands tightened around his rosarius. For a moment, the air shimmered before him, and the shadows along the wall deepened. A shape took form within them, faint, flickering, yet undeniably there. A figure in silver armor identical to his own, watching him with eyes like mirrors of mercury. He rose slowly. The shadow mimicked him, and as he stared into the faceless reflection, realization dawned cold as the void. This was not possession. It was memory, awakened. The reflection raised its blade, and Kael whispered, "Emperor, preserve me." The lights went out. When the lights returned, they came not as illumination but as a pallid afterglow. The lumen strips embedded in the ceiling flickered erratically, their brightness bleeding through the haze of incense that hung unmoving in the air. Kael's reflection was gone, yet the echo of its gaze remained. He stood motionless in the center of his chamber, pulse hammering in his temples. Every instinct trained into him since childhood screamed for discipline, for stillness, for prayer, for the Emperor's name as shield and sword against doubt. But beneath that training something deeper stirred. Fear. Not the raw, human panic of mortals, but the cold understanding that he had witnessed something no gray knight should. He holstered his storm bolter, its machine spirit murmuring faintly within his gauntlet, and whispered the activation litany. Blessed light shimmered along the weapon's surface, sanctified circuitry responding to his touch. But no amount of faith could dispel what he had seen. The air itself felt heavier, as if laden with unseen presence. He turned toward the shrine once more, kneeling before the stone effigy. His voice trembled only once as he began the canticle of abjuration. By the throne eternal, I am his hand and his silence. I fear not the shadow, for the shadow fears me. He repeated the words until they lost meaning, until sound became rhythm, and rhythm became armor. Yet even then, the whisper lingered beneath his breath. Not defiant, not mocking, merely waiting. He did not sleep that night. Instead, he walked the fortress's endless halls, each turn leading deeper into memory. The corridors of Titan were monuments to duty, walls engraved with the names of fallen brothers, alcoves filled with relics of forgotten wars. Statues of heroes stood silent in their niches, eyes fixed upon eternity. The deeper Kael went, the quieter the world became, until even the mechanical hum of the fortress seemed to fade into the rhythm of his heartbeat. He found himself drawn to the Chapel of Penance, a vast chamber hollowed from the mountain's heart. Its ceiling rose beyond sight, vanishing into darkness. Chains hung from the upper reaches, suspending relics and sacred seals that glowed faintly with protective light. At the far end of the chamber stood a single figure, a statue of a gray knight carved from obsidian, kneeling in supplication. The statue's helm was bowed, its sword plunged into the floor before it, as if holding some unseen horror at bay. Kael approached slowly. The floor beneath his boots was worn smooth by centuries of pilgrimage. He had come here many times before to meditate, to find calm before battle. Now the air was different. There was no serenity, only expectancy. He reached the statue and placed his gauntlet hand upon the hilt of the stone sword. The world tilted. A surge of psychic static flooded his mind. Not sound, but sensation. The feeling of distant screams pressed into silence, of fire burning in reverse, of time collapsing inward like a closing wound. He fell to one knee, breath stolen from his chest. In that instant, he saw again the battlefield of Belizer IV. The sky a maelstrom of crimson and void. The ground alive with flesh that was not flesh. He remembered striking the demon prince down, its eyes filled with laughter even as it died. But in the vision, something changed. The demon's last word had not been a curse or a scream. It had been a whisper. His name, Kael. The same voice that haunted his cell. The same tone that breathed through his dreams. When the vision released him, he was no longer alone in the chapel. Across the chamber, beneath the hanging relics, a shadow moved, tall, armored, unmistakable. It stepped into the faint light cast by the candles, revealing its shape. A gray knight, clad in silver that reflected nothing. His helm was turned toward Kael, though the faceplate showed no sign of life. The silence between them deepened until Kael could hear the faint ticking of his own armor joints. He drew his nemesis blade, its power field crackling softly. "Identify yourself," he said, voice cold and measured. The figure tilted its head, the movement slow, almost curious. Then, in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once, it spoke. "You already know me." The words were soft, calm, but Kael felt their weight press against his mind like the pressure of deep water. He took a step forward, sword raised, the Emperor's name forming silently on his lips. "I am purity," Kael said. "I am his will made flesh. You are nothing but shadow." The reflection smiled. It was his smile, precise, faint, controlled. "Then why do you tremble?" Kael lunged. The blade passed through the figure as if striking smoke. It did not vanish, but folded around the strike like liquid silver. The reflection's voice became a whisper again, echoing from within Kael's mind. "You killed me once." Pain lanced through him, psychic, sharp, unbearable. He fell to his knees, clutching his head as images flooded his vision. A battlefield under a blood sky, his own gauntlet hands driving a blade through another gray knight's chest, the shock in his brother's eyes before the light faded. The memory burned away as quickly as it came, leaving only emptiness. When he looked up, the chapel was empty. The statue loomed above him once more, unmoving. The silence returned, deep and absolute. He rose slowly, his breath unsteady. The psychic wards inscribed upon the walls flickered faintly, as if reacting to some unseen presence. He traced the sign of the Aquila across his chest and turned toward the exit. He needed answers. The librarium might hold them, or at least the illusion of them. But before he reached the door, a final whisper coiled through the chamber, carried on air that had no source. "Remember what you buried." The words followed him long after he left the chapel, echoing down the endless halls of Titan like a ghost chained to his footsteps. Kael did not speak to anyone during the hours that followed. He walked among his brothers, silent and distant, eyes hidden behind his helm. When questioned, he said nothing. When ordered to rest, he obeyed in form but not in spirit. The whisper had changed something inside him. Doubt had taken root not in faith but in memory itself. He began to question what was real. The battle, the victory, even his brothers' faces. Each memory seemed slightly wrong, as though seen through a mirror just beginning to crack. When at last he reached his cell again, he removed his armor piece by piece, setting each segment carefully upon the rack beside his cot. The silver plates gleamed faintly in the dim light. For a long while he stood before them, staring at his own reflection in the chest plate. He smiled back. Kael staggered backward, heart pounding. The reflection's lips moved, though no sound reached his ears. He could almost make out the words, read them in the curve of that impossible mouth. "You left me there." The lumen flickered once. Then darkness claimed the room. Kael's last thought before the blackness closed around him was not of prayer, nor of the Emperor's light, but of the shadow that bore his face, and the terrible realization that perhaps it had not followed him from the warp. Perhaps it had never left. Kael woke to the sound of metal groaning. The walls of his chamber pulsed faintly, as if alive beneath their armor of ceramite and warding script. For a brief, nauseating moment, he could not tell if he was dreaming. His breathing echoed too loud within his skull, each inhale rasping through the vox grill of a helm he was no longer wearing. The silence pressed close around him, too complete, too deliberate. Then came the rhythm, soft, steady, like footsteps pacing the corridor beyond his door. He rose, moving by instinct, muscles obeying long-buried reflex before his mind caught up. His armor still hung in pieces beside the cot, each segment gleaming faintly in the low light. He donned only the cuirass and gauntlets, enough to fight if it came to that. The footsteps stopped. For an instant he thought he heard breathing. Not his own, but another's, ragged and shallow, just beyond the threshold. "Who's there?" His voice broke the stillness, reverberating along the chamber walls. No answer. He reached for the handle of his door and hesitated. The memory of the reflection, that smile made of nothing, still burned behind his eyes. Caution whispered where courage once ruled. But gray knights did not yield to fear. He pulled the door open. The corridor outside lay empty, bathed in the cold blue of lumen strips. The air smelled faintly of sanctified oils and ozone. Nothing moved. He stepped forward, eyes sweeping the length of the hall, the runes etched into the walls flickering faintly as his presence passed. No intruder, no shadow, only silence. He turned back toward his chamber and stopped. Someone had written across the inside of his door. The words were faint, traced in a substance that shimmered silver under the light, like mercury drawn thin. 3 words only: remember the breach. The message pulsed once, then bled away, absorbed into the metal as if it had never been there. Kael's breath caught. The breach. The word meant many things in the lexicon of Titan. A failed warding circle, a broken ritual, an unsealed gate. But there was only one event capitalized in every archive, whispered even among veterans as taboo: the Belizer breach. A moment during the cleansing when the warp itself had ruptured into reality. A moment Kael had never been permitted to recall. The chaplains had ordered memory excision for all survivors. The librarians had locked away what fragments remained. For most, the past was mercifully erased. But for Kael, the shadows in his dreams had refused to fade. He began to move, the corridors blurring past him. His destination was clear before he consciously chose it: the restricted vaults beneath the Librarium Sanctus. Access required psychic verification, but his rank as Brother-Captain gave him limited clearance. The guards, 2 Terminators of the First Brotherhood, watched silently as he approached. Neither moved to stop him. Perhaps they sensed the aura clinging to him, the invisible weight of something the wards could not name. Within the librarium's depths, the air grew colder. The walls were lined with data slate repositories and crystalline containment columns filled with the faint light of suspended thought. Every footstep echoed like thunder. At the chamber's center stood a single archivist, robed in black and silver, his face hidden behind an augmetic mask. Brother-Captain Kael, the archivist intoned, voice modulated by vox distortion. Your presence here is irregular. I seek records of the Belizer campaign, Kael said. Unredacted versions. That knowledge is sealed by order of the Ordo Malleus. Kael stepped closer, his shadow falling across the archivist's form. Then, by the Emperor's will, unseal it. For a long moment, the machine-faced scribe said nothing. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he extended a clawed hand toward the archives. Psychic locks flared, one after another, as ancient runes peeled open like eyes. From within the depths of the vault, a single data crystal floated free, its glow pale and cold. Kael took it. The moment his fingers closed around it, a pulse of sensation rippled through his mind. Not words, not images, but impressions. Blood on white snow, the scent of burnt ozone, and the laughter of something immense and patient. He staggered back. The archivist's voice followed him. Knowledge demands sacrifice, Brother-Captain. Do you still wish to see? Kael didn't answer. He pressed the crystal to the reader embedded in his vambrace. The air around him shimmered. The walls fell away. And suddenly he was standing once more amid the ruin of Belizer 4. The planet's surface stretched before him in all directions. Ash plains scorched black, sky torn open into roiling void. He could hear the clash of battle, the cries of dying men, the chant of exorcism, his own voice among them. And then he saw it, the rift, a wound in the world, a vertical slash of absolute darkness from which poured light. Not golden, not divine, but searing white like the reflection of a dying star. At its edge stood the demon prince, vast and magnificent, wings like the ruins of heaven, laughter spilling like molten glass. Kael remembered the battle. He remembered charging forward, his brothers at his side. He remembered the heat, the light, the impact. But what the vision showed now was different. The demon did not strike him. It embraced him. Their forms fused for a heartbeat, soul to soul. Kael felt himself dissolving into its essence, felt something of it flow into him. Not corruption, not possession, but understanding. The creature's final words were not curse or mockery, but benediction. We are the same, you and I, born from his thought, bound by his will. Then the world broke. The vision shattered. leaving Kael kneeling upon the cold librarium floor, gasping for breath. The crystal had dissolved into dust between his fingers. The archivist was gone. Only the echo of those words remained, whispering through the back of his skull. The same. Kael rose, unsteady. His reflection in the nearest column of glass watched him with unblinking eyes. It smiled once more, faint, patient, almost merciful. "Now you remember." The voice was his own. The light of Titan's wards flared across the vault, reacting to an unseen psychic surge. Somewhere above, alarms began to toll, low and distant. Kael stood amidst the rising storm of light, his mind torn open, his faith trembling not from doubt but from revelation. Because now he understood what the nightmares meant. The reflection was not a demon. It was the part of himself that had never left the rift, the fragment of his soul that had looked upon the warp and been remade in its image. He was still pure, still faithful, but not whole. And in the heart of Titan's silence, surrounded by holy wards and chanting servitors, Brother-Captain Alaric Kael whispered to the void within him, a prayer not of fear, but of acknowledgement. "Emperor, if this is the price of purity, let it be paid." The whisper answered, gentle as breath, "Then your vigil begins." The light dimmed, leaving only shadow. Sleep came to Kael in fragments now. What rest the chaplains prescribed through litany and meditation was no longer enough to quiet the turbulence in his mind. The wards carved into his chamber walls pulsed in erratic rhythm, their light flickering in response to unseen interference, as though the sanctified air of Titan itself hesitated to touch him. When exhaustion finally dragged him under, he found himself standing not in the cold metal of the fortress-monastery, but on a plain of black glass stretching beneath a blood-red sky. In the distance, a single spire of impossible geometry rose, twisting like a blade driven into the heart of the horizon. It pulsed with faint luminescence, calling to him. He took one step forward, and the glass beneath his boot rippled like water. Beneath its surface, faces drifted. Some were human, some were not. All whispered in voices that brushed the edge of comprehension. "Brother Captain, remember us?" He knelt. One of the faces that surfaced was familiar, the scarred features of Brother Oryx, the Justicar who had fallen at Belizer. His eyes opened, pale and endless. "Kael," the apparition said softly, "you left us in the light." Kael drew back, heart hammering. "You died a warrior's death. I carried your name to the shrine of remembrance." Oryx's lips curved in a semblance of a smile. "Then why do I still dream?" The ground quaked, the horizon split, the spire's glow intensifying until it burned white-hot. From within its radiance came a sound. Not thunder, not a scream, but the echo of something vast inhaling. Kael felt the air leave his lungs. The world folded around him. When he blinked, he was no longer on the plain. He stood instead within the cathedral halls of Titan, though everything seemed wrong. The banners that should have borne the sigil of the Inquisition now hung inverted. The statues of the Emperor were faceless, their halos cracked, and the distant chant of the librarians echoed backward, syllables unraveling in reverse. He turned slowly. Behind him stood the reflection. It wore his armor. It bore his face. But where Kael's eyes were pale gray, the reflections were gold, burning with a light that felt neither holy nor damned. "You sought truth," it said, voice calm. "Now you dream what is real." Kael reached for his sword. His hand passed through its hilt as if through mist. "Why do you haunt me?" he demanded. "Because you remember," the reflection said. "And memory is contagion." It began to walk toward him. Each step sent ripples through the floor like waves across the surface of the glass plane. "The librarians took from you what you could not endure. They sealed away the knowledge of what you became. But truth persists, Kael. It breathes through your veins. It whispers in your pulse." "I am pure," Kael hissed. "I am his weapon." The reflection tilted its head. "And what is a weapon that begins to think of itself?" The world trembled again. Cracks raced across the cathedral floor, spilling light from beneath. Through them, Kael could see not the stone foundations of Titan, but the same infinite plane of black glass, faces pressing upward, screaming without sound. You were touched by something greater than corruption, the reflection continued. You glimpsed what lies beneath his design. The Emperor did not build perfection. He built a prison, and we are its walls. Kael struck forward, lunging with the force of will alone. His form collided with his reflection, and for an instant they merged. Memory cascaded through him, unstoppable. He saw the Emperor, not as a god of light, but as a being of impossible sorrow, kneeling amid the ruins of countless worlds. He saw the Grey Knights forged not merely to fight the warp, but to contain something older, something born of the Emperor's first thought, the echo of his own shadow. He screamed. When he opened his eyes again, he was awake, back in his chamber. The walls were smoking, the wards burned black. Frost rhymed the air where psychic backlash had kissed the metal. His armor's autosensors blared with containment warnings. In the reflection of his visor, faint and trembling, his eyes glowed, not gold, but a flicker of light too bright to name. And from somewhere deep within the fortress, Kael heard the low tolling of a sanctum alarm. Not a call to battle, not a breach, a psychic contamination alert. Someone or something knew he had remembered too much. The alarm's toll faded into the cold silence of Titan's inner sanctums, leaving Kael alone in the half-light of his quarters. He sat motionless, feeling the echo of the vision reverberate through his skull like the fading hum of a broken blade. The reflection's words lingered, "Memory is contagion." His breath came shallow through the vox grill as he stared at his hands. Even with gauntlets off, they felt like iron, lifeless, too heavy to be his own. Then the door's sanctum seal hissed open. A pair of robed acolytes stepped inside, followed by two custodians in golden armor, their halberds gleaming with psychic wards. Kael rose instinctively, every inch of his form coiling with disciplined restraint. "Brother-Captain Kael," one of the acolytes began, voice distorted through a metallic mask. "By order of the Inquisitorial Synod, you are to be detained for immediate evaluation. There has been an anomaly in your psychic readings." Kael's gaze drifted to the glowing sigil on the acolyte's chest, a black eye encircled by thorns. He recognized it instantly, Ordo Malleus, his own order, his own masters. "I require the authority of the Grand Master's seal before I obey that order," Kael replied quietly. The acolyte hesitated, but the custodians took a step forward in perfect unison, the air humming around them. The Golden Warriors did not speak. They did not need to. Their presence was statement enough. These were the Emperor's companions. If they were here, then the Synod's fear ran deep. Kael slowly inclined his head, more gesture than submission. "Then lead the way." The procession moved through Titan's labyrinthine corridors, silent except for the faint thrum of distant reactors and the whisper of sacred machinery. As they passed beneath arches lined with purity seals, Kael caught the stares of servitors pausing mid-task, their augmetic eyes following him. Even the fortress itself seemed to know what was happening. He was led into a chamber of obsidian stone lit by suspended candles and the dull red of containment sigils. At the center stood an inquisitor he did not recognize, a woman in burnished silver armor, her face marked by ritual scars and augmetic implants that gleamed like cold mercury. "Kael of Titan," she said, her voice as sharp as cut glass. "Do you understand why you've been summoned?" "I've heard the alarms," he replied. "But no, enlighten me." She paced slowly, hands folded behind her back. During last night's meditation cycle, the librarian detected a psychic anomaly originating from your quarters. Warp resonance patterns were recorded that do not match standard night calibration. You are to be subjected to purity verification and mind scrutiny. Kael's tone remained calm. "And if I fail?" Her gaze did not waver. "Then you will be sanctified." He almost smiled. A beautiful word for destruction. Without warning, her hand rose, a gesture, and the custodians activated their halberds. The air shimmered as psychic dampeners engaged, pressing against Kael like a physical weight. He could feel his connection to the Imperium being sealed, his mind compressed into silence. Then the Inquisitor approached, extending a small obsidian shard inscribed with the Emperor's sigil. "Place your hand upon it. Recite the oath of the silver blade." Kael did as commanded, but as his fingers brushed the relic's surface, the world around him fractured again. The chamber flickered, walls dissolving into that endless black plane. The spire reappeared, closer now, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. Behind it, shadows coiled, not demons, not warp entities, but forms of impossible geometry, like angels drawn in reversed symmetry. He heard the reflection's voice again. "Do not resist. They fear what they cannot name." Kael tore his hand from the relic, gasping. The custodians moved instantly, halberds crossing before him. The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed. "What did you see?" she demanded. "I saw truth," Kael said quietly, "and it is not yours." The lights in the chamber dimmed. The candles extinguished one by one, as though swallowed by invisible mouths. The sigils on the floor began to melt, their red light twisting into violet flame. The Inquisitor raised her staff, chanting the litany of binding, but Kael barely heard her. Something inside him had awakened. A low hum built in the air, rising until the metal itself vibrated. The custodians staggered, their armor groaning under unseen pressure. One of them dropped to a knee, vox grill sputtering static prayers. Kael's mind burned, but it was not pain. It was memory, the reflection's words, the spire's call, the faces beneath the glass, all converging into a single understanding. He was not dreaming of the warp. The warp was dreaming of him. He forced his voice through the storm of static. "Tell your masters," he said to the Inquisitor, "that their weapon remembers." And then, as the light burst outward and the walls screamed under psychic rupture, Kael vanished into the blaze. When the light faded, the chamber stood empty. Only the melted sigils remained, and a faint echo of a voice that did not belong to any living man. Darkness was not absence but density, a weight that pressed against Kael's armor and skin as if the void itself resented his intrusion. When his vision returned, the familiar silver of Titan's halls was gone. In its place stretched a subterranean vault he did not recognize, its walls carved with runes older than any imperial script he knew. Faint light bled from the seams in the stone, the color of dying stars. He moved slowly, hand instinctively brushing the hilt of his nemesis blade, though he knew it would offer no protection against what had brought him here. His autosenses flickered, trying to identify location and structure, but all data returned null. It was as if he had been erased from Titan's memory. A sound rippled through the air. Not footsteps, not machinery, but a pulse, measured and organic, came from deeper within the vault. Kael followed it, each step echoing like a heartbeat in a tomb. The corridor widened into a chamber vast enough to hold a Titan itself. At its center rose a mirror of black crystal, smooth as frozen water, rimmed with sigils that seemed to shift under his gaze. It pulsed faintly in rhythm with his heartbeat. He knew what waited beyond before it spoke. "You understand now," said the reflection. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, perfectly matched to his own. The dreams were not warning. They were memory, reawakening. Kael stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "You're a ghost," an echo conjured by the warp. The reflection tilted its head. "If I were, would you still see your own armor marked by the same burn? The same fracture in your left vambrace? I'm you, Kael, the fragment the librarians buried when you first touched the spire." He stared at the mirrored figure. That world was purged, its surface turned to glass. And yet the glass remembers. For a moment, silence filled the chamber. The air shimmered and images unfolded across the mirror's surface. The battlefield of Belizer, where Kael's strike team had been deployed against a demon incursion. He saw again the broken sky, the storm of blood and fire, the spire rising from the crater like a wound in reality. He remembered the hymn of steel and the roar of his brothers as they charged, and then the light. He had reached the base of the spire before anyone else. His blade had met its surface, and in that instant, something had reached back. The memory bled into the present. He staggered, gripping his chest as voices flooded his mind. The voices of his brothers, the countless dead who had fallen to the warp. Not demons, not spirits, fragments of the same dream. The Emperor forged us to destroy the unclean, Kael murmured, not to remember their sorrow. The Emperor forged you to contain what he feared, the reflection replied. You are not merely warrior, you are seal, a lock built in flesh and faith. But your soul was not meant to hold forever. Kael's breath hitched. Then what am I now? The reflection smiled. Awake. The mirror rippled like disturbed water, and the reflection stepped through. Its form solidified, gleaming with impossible light, armor forged of both matter and memory, runes burning across every surface. The two Kaels faced one another, identical yet divided. You cannot return, said the reflection. They will not let you. To the Synod, you are contagion incarnate. But to me, you are beginning. Kael drew his sword, the weapon's psychic hum filling the chamber. If you are truly me, he said, then you know I will not yield. I do. The reflection raised its hand. And that is why you will. Light consumed the chamber. Kael felt himself drawn inward, into the mirror, into the reflection. His mind fractured, one half screaming, the other whispering calm. Images of Terra, of the Emperor's throne, of the Astronomicon blazing in infinite night. All flickered past him like memories of someone else's life. Then silence. When the light faded, only one figure remained standing before the mirror. His armor smoked faintly. His eyes burned with a light that was neither gold nor silver, but something in between, like the reflection of dawn on broken glass. He turned toward the corridor. Footsteps echoed from the distance. Gray Knights, a strike team responding to the psychic rupture. Kael's expression was unreadable. Memory, he whispered, is contagion. And with that, the mirror behind him shattered. Fragments of black crystal rained across the floor, each shard flickering with faint light, like stars dying one by one. Kael vanished into the darkness beyond, leaving only silence in his wake. Titan did not sleep, and never had. Its foundations thrummed with silent hymns of vigilance, its vaulted sanctums alive with the constant murmur of prayer and data stream. Yet in the cycles following Kael's disappearance, the fortress-monastery felt different, as if the mountain itself were holding its breath. In the librarium's deepest sanctum, Inquisitor Sarah Varn stood before a suspended hololithic display, its pale light washing across her scarred features. Streams of psychic telemetry flickered in and out of coherence, numbers collapsing into symbols, symbols twisting into language. None of it made sense. Cross-reference with the Ordo's restricted archives, she ordered coldly. I want every anomaly since the Belizer campaign analyzed. A robed adept at the console stammered a quick assent, his mechadendrites twitching nervously. Even the machine spirits seemed reluctant to respond. Sarah's gaze shifted toward the containment shard resting within a stasis field at the room's center, a fragment of black crystal retrieved from the ruins of Kael's chamber. It pulsed faintly, the rhythm disturbingly close to a heartbeat. When she approached, the air temperature dropped several degrees, the light around it dimming as though consumed. She whispered the Emperor's name under her breath. The act did nothing to steady her. Behind her, a soft metallic rasp echoed, the sound of armored footsteps. Grand Master Vardis, she greeted without turning. The towering figure came to stand beside her. The Grand Master's silver armor reflected the stasis field's dim light, every inch etched with the symbols of purification. Yet there was fatigue in his stance, a heaviness rarely seen in one of his station. His essence is gone, Vardis said. His voice was calm, but there was a note beneath it, something that might have been regret. No body, no psychic residue traceable within Titan's wards. If Kael still lives, he is beyond even the Emperor's sight. Sarah regarded him steadily. You've seen the recordings from the containment chamber. I have. Then you understand the threat. Vardis said nothing for a moment. His eyes, hidden behind the faint gleam of his helm's lenses, remained fixed on the crystal shard. A threat, he said finally, or a sign? Sarah turned to face him fully. You speak dangerously, Grand Master. I speak as a servant of the Emperor who has watched too many brothers die without understanding why, he replied. Kael was loyal, unbreakably so. If he succumbed to corruption, I would have felt it across the psychic communion. But what I sensed in that moment was not taint. It was awakening. The Inquisitor's lips thinned. Do not let the word of a heretic infect your judgment. The Inquisition does not fear truth. Vardis interrupted, voice rising slightly. We are meant to stand against the darkness, not blind ourselves to what it reveals. For a long time, neither spoke. The shard pulsed between them, its glow deepening. In its surface, faint reflections danced. Not their own faces, but the shifting silhouettes of countless figures. Vardis turned away first. Seal the lower vaults. Suspend all warp gate travel until further notice. I want the librarians doubled on Astronomican synchronization duty. If this is spreading, we must contain it before it reaches the choir. Sarah nodded, her tone clipped. And if containment fails? He paused at the threshold, his voice low. Then Titan will burn before it falls. When he was gone, Sarah allowed herself a single exhale. The air seemed to hum around her, as though listening. She looked back at the shard. Its light flickered once, brighter now, and for a heartbeat, she thought she saw something inside it. A face, Kael's. The vox in her ear crackled suddenly, making her flinch. Inquisitor Varn, a voice rasped. Psychana Vault 17. We have an incident. Her heart sank. Define incident. Containment breach, came the reply. One of the librarians. He's chanting your name. Sarah's hand went to her weapon automatically, though she knew it would be useless against what she might find. She gave a single command. Seal all levels below. I'm on my way. As she strode down the corridor, the light panels above her flickered in erratic rhythm. The air itself seemed to warp around her, carrying with it faint whispers. Words in a language older than mankind. Behind her, in the silent librarium, the stasis field flickered. The black shard floated for a moment, weightless, before cracking down the center with a sound like a whispered breath. From within, something stirred. Titan's corridors were colder than ever as Inquisitor Varn strode toward Psychana Vault 17, her footsteps echoing hollow against the cavernous stone. The flickering lumen panels cast wavering banners of half-light, as though the fortress itself had begun to hesitate. She passed alcoves lined with reliquaries and purity seals, yet even those tokens felt diminished, as if their virtue were being weighed in new balances she had never known. The door to Vault 17 loomed ahead, its iris sealing rings inscribed with wards and stylized script. The vox feed crackled again. Inquisitor Varn, it's worse than we predicted. The librarian, he speaks in tongues not known to the administratum. His psionic patterns are fracturing. She paused only a breath, then applied her sanctified code sigil. The iris opened with a reluctant hiss. Inside, pale light slashed across a chamber filled with arcane consoles, data crystals, and the suspended psychic resonance cages used to contain rogue emanations. At the center knelt a librarian in blue and silver, his hands raised, his helm cast aside so one could see wild eyes. He muttered constantly, voice jagged and staccato, repeating lines she could not yet parse. Around him the air shimmered, and spectral motes of warp static drifted like dust in a dying sunbeam. When she entered, he turned toward her. His expression was one of dread and something else, recognition. Inquisitor, he gasped, voice cracking. Kael speaks through me. His eyes flicked to the consoles, then to the walls. The wards carved their quivered, as though the stone itself labored under strain. Varn moved closer, placing a hand on the librarian's shoulder. You are to be restrained immediately, she said. You are compromised. The librarian shook violently. Cold sweat beaded on his brow. No, no, he rasped. I am not lost. He is angry. He demands recognition. These walls lie. The shard lies. His voice jagged. You must listen. Before she could respond, the consoles exploded outward in spectral arcs. Psychic feedback ripped through the chamber, knocking Varn off balance. Sparks of warp light crackled across the floor. The librarian screamed, and from his chest burst a haze of shadow threads that writhed into the air, coiling toward the walls, toward the console banks, toward Varn. She raised her weapon, but a psychic tremor in her mind forced her to stagger backward. The shadow threads wrapped around the consoles, pulling them inward until they fused into a shifting mass of negative geometry. The librarian fell silent, his body slack, his lips no longer moving. In that dreadful instant, a voice echoed not in her ear but in her mind. Remember the breach. It whispered like wind across cracked stone. Her vision swam. She saw impossible angles, spires of black glass, faces pressed behind mirror surfaces, and through them the figure of Kael, standing, watching, unchanged. She blinked. The chamber snapped back to itself. The consoles were blackened shards, the librarian unmoving on the floor. The shadow threads had vanished, but the wards inscribed on the stone door groaned under strain, their light flickering tenuously. Varn swallowed, pushing past shock. She cut the restraints on the librarian and knelt, placing a hand over his heart. His chest rose in shallow rhythm. She lifted her hand from him, voice firm. Seal this vault. Burn the tainted consoles. Behind her, Tekedeps already moved to lock the iris. She turned back toward the librarian. You must tell me what you saw, what you felt. He lay still, unknowing perhaps, as she retrieved her portable sanctified reader. She placed it upon his forehead and began the psychic scan. Data streamed, symbols turning into visions. What she saw terrified her. Fragments of Kael's memories, interspersed with something alien, something older. There were images of Titan's foundations, of the fortress's deepest wards, of that terrible spire on Belizar 4, its wounds reaching outward like fingers. She saw Kael there, mirrored, dividing, merging. The shards of his consciousness stretched across psychoscapes like filaments of light. When the reading ended, Varn sat back with trembling lips. The librarian returned to consciousness slowly, blinking. Inquisitor, he whispered, voice weak. He's not gone. He's unmade, divided. He reaches through me because I carry a shard of memory that he claims. His voice trailed off. Varn stared at him, feeling the weight of everything shifting beneath her feet. She realized that Kael's disappearance was not simply escape or exile, but transformation. Something within the fortress, and now within the order itself, had grown. What she had called contamination was perhaps a revelation. She rose, helping the librarian to his feet, then addressed the Tekedeps. Clear the chamber. Flag all consoles as irrecoverable. Seal this level until the Archivum of the Ordo can send cleansing rites. Inform Grand Master Vardis. The contagion is active. She paused, looking at the librarian. We treat this as internal war. Containment, by any means necessary. He nodded, fear and sorrow in his eyes. As he walked past her toward the iris, Varn's gaze lingered on the cracked consoles, still tinged with warp residue. A shard of memory, a spark of Kael, perhaps even a fragment of what the reflection had spoken. All mingled there. She stepped through the iris just as the vault sealed behind her. In the corridor, the hush felt oppressive now, as though the fortress awaited judgment. Every servitor, every corridor, every rune-laden wall stood in silent vigil. She felt their eyes upon her, watchers of a fortress beginning to fracture. Her vox whispered in her ear, Inquisitor Varn, command from Grand Master Vardis, converge on the librarium's nexus. We are losing control of the psychic registers. Varn nodded, steeling herself. The ghost in Titan's bones had awakened. The echo beneath Titan was calling. The librarium nexus of Titan had always been a sanctum of silence, a cathedral to thought, where the psychic resonance of thousands of oaths, prayers, and memories were kept in crystalline archives. But now, That silence had curdled into a tension so sharp it felt alive. The air itself trembled with psionic unrest. Inquisitor Varn entered through the archway, her cloak trailing in the charged gloom. Lumens flickered across the immense vault, illuminating pillars inscribed with silvered runes of warding. Between them, figures moved, librarians, custodians, tech priests, their movements frantic yet reverent, as though fearing that even breath might summon something terrible. At the center of the chamber stood Grand Master Vardes, his armor etched with the history of countless crusades, his presence a bastion of will. His eyes met hers briefly, a glint of restrained fury behind the golden mask. "You've seen the reports," he said without greeting. The psychic flux began spreading through the lower archives an hour ago. Entire data vaults have gone dark. The machine spirits refuse communion. "I have," she replied, "and I've seen what lies beneath the cause. Kael is not dead. He's fragmented." Vardes turned sharply. "Fragmented?" "He exists as echoes, consciousness diffused across warp and mind, leaking through anyone who shared psychic linkages with him. The librarian I recovered is one such conduit. There may be more." The Grand Master was silent for a long moment. Then, "You're telling me that Kael's mind is haunting Titan?" "Not haunting," she corrected quietly. "Reaching." A pulse rolled through the chamber, low, resonant, almost organic. The runes along the pillars flared, their light bending unnaturally, twisting like serpents in pain. A chill swept over them. "Throne," murmured one of the tech priests. "The vault wards are reversing polarity." Suddenly, the floor beneath them rippled with psychic static. The librarium's core, a massive crystalline sphere suspended in gravitic containment, began to glow from within. Ghostly silhouettes flickered across its surface, forming brief, agonized faces before dissolving back into the light. Varn's vox bead screamed to life. "Containment breach in sublevel 3. Reality stress fractures at..." The message cut out. "Seal the nexus," Vardes roared. "All channels restricted." Custodians raised their halberds as the light intensified. From within the core came a voice, fractured, distant, layered with impossible echoes. "Do you hear them, Varn? The ones you silenced? The ones buried beneath Titan's ice?" The voice was Kael's, but beneath it were dozens of others, overlapping. The voices of Grey Knights, of priests of the dead. Varn stepped forward, eyes locked on the glowing sphere. "Kael, what are you becoming?" The sphere pulsed, its light deepening to blood crimson. "Becoming? I was never whole. You broke me, piece by piece, every oath and interrogation carving another fracture. Now I am what remains when faith forgets mercy." The Grand Master's voice thundered. "Silence your tongue, Phantom. You defile the sanctum of the Emperor's chosen." Kael's laughter, if it could be called that, echoed like breaking glass. "Chosen? You are prisons wearing flesh. The Emperor's light casts shadows longer than you dare measure. I am only the echo of that shadow." Varn turned toward Vardes. "If this continues, the core will rupture. The psychic backlash will unmake half the fortress. Then we cut it free," Vardes said grimly. "Purge protocol. Sanctus Ultima." The tech priests hesitated. "Grand Master, that would annihilate the entire librarium." "Do it," Vardes ordered. The servitors began chanting Benheric hymns, activating the self-purge code. The floor sigils blazed white-hot. Energy coalesced beneath the core, building toward apocalyptic release. Kael's voice turned into a whisper. "You think to burn me out, but I have already left this cage. I am in your dreams, your armor, your vows. I am in every oath you failed to keep." The sigils erupted. A blinding surge tore through the chamber. When the light receded, the core was gone. Only scorched metal and silence remained. Varn stood amid the ruin, her cloak scorched, her mind ringing with residual static. "Did we destroy him?" she asked. Vardes stared into the smoldering pit. "We destroyed something. Whether it was Kael or our own reflection, I can no longer say." Varn turned slowly toward the far wall. On the blackened stone, where the psychic fire had burned hottest, a single phrase had been carved, not by hand, but by will alone. The Emperor dreams through broken men. A chill passed through her. Vardis gave the order to evacuate and seal the nexus permanently. Yet as they departed, Varn could not shake the feeling that Kael's echo was still there. Not in the walls, but in the spaces between her thoughts. Far above, in the cold night of Titan, storm clouds gathered across the void. And deep below the fortress-monastery, where no light had touched in 10,000 years, something began to stir. Something that remembered the name Kael. The storm that broke over Titan was unlike any natural tempest. It carried no rain, only thunder made of psionic resonance. Deep, rolling vibrations that rattled the very foundations of the fortress-monastery. Inquisitor Varn stood before the viewing port of her vessel, the solemn judicant, watching the clouds swirl around the void shields. Her reflection looked almost spectral, carved by the dim lumen light into a face both weary and resolute. Kael's words still echoed within her skull. The Emperor dreams through broken men. It had been days since the incident in the Librarium Nexus, and yet, even now, she would wake in the dark hours feeling a whisper brush her thoughts. Familiar, insidious, intimate. The Vox came alive with a burst of static. Inquisitor, came the voice of Interrogator Hale. Adeptus Astra Telepathica requests immediate contact. They claim disturbances across multiple astropathic choirs. Unexplained psychic bleedthroughs. Voices calling themselves the Echo of Titan. Varn's jaw tightened. Patch them through. The chamber's lumen dimmed as the hollow projector flickered to life, revealing the hooded form of Archastropath Verdun. His eyes seared white, the sockets glowing faintly with residual warp light. Behind him, the walls of the choir chamber writhed with faint distortions, like reality struggling to stay intact. Inquisitor Varn, Verdun rasped. You have felt it too. She did not deny it. When did the phenomenon begin? Hours after the psychic purge you initiated. The signal spreads through choir networks, infecting thought forms faster than containment allows. It speaks in fragments, names, litanies, the dead. The echo is conscious, Varn murmured. Verdun inclined his head. If it is, then it knows us. It calls to those who have sworn oaths. Even our lowest telepaths hear it whispering of failure, faith, and awakening. For a moment, both said nothing. Then Varn spoke softly. Have you informed Terra? Verdun hesitated. No message passes the Astronomicon uncorrupted. Every astropath who attempts transmission burns. The hollow flickered violently. Verdun's form distorted, stretching into grotesque silhouette. His voice deepened, layered with another. He watches through you, Inquisitor, through every vow unfulfilled. Then the link severed. The chamber was left in silence, save for the faint hum of the ship's generators. Hale approached, pale. This is no longer a containment breach. It's contagion. Varn nodded grimly. No, it's judgment. She turned away, walking toward the data altar, where a flickering projection of Imperial records hovered, reports of strange phenomena across the segmentum solar. Imperial Guard units paralyzed by psychic fear, Mechanicus constructs reciting prayers never programmed into their machine spirits, even Astartes librarians reporting shared visions of a figure bound in light and shadow. The echo was spreading not as possession but as infection of meaning. It was rewriting faith itself. Varn's hand hovered above the activation rune. Prepare a course for Luna. We'll need to access the Inquisitorial Conclave archives directly. If this echo can reach the Astronomicon, it could reach the Emperor's throne itself. As she spoke the words, the ship trembled, not from impact, but from within. The lumen strips flickered, dimmed, then glowed red. A low moan rippled through the corridors. Hale drew his weapon. What was that? Varn felt it before she heard it. A pressure behind her eyes, the sensation of being observed. The Vox crackled again, though no one had touched it. You cannot run from thought, Inquisitor. You cannot exile memory. Kael's voice, but distorted, multiplied, as though hundreds of minds were speaking through him. Kael aimed at the Vox emitter as though it were a heretic. "Should I?" "Don't," Varn said quietly. "It wants to be acknowledged." For a long moment she listened. The whisper spoke of oaths broken, wars lost, prayers unanswered. Then something shifted. The tone softened, almost pleading. "Varn, you said we fought for salvation. But salvation was never what he wanted. Was it?" Her breath caught. The voice had changed. It was Kael's real voice, unlayered, human. The one she remembered from long before the inquest, before the madness. "Kael," she whispered, "if there's anything left of you, let go. You're trapped." "Trapped?" The whisper turned mournful. "No, I am finally free." The light surged, then returned to normal. The presence faded, but Varn knew better than to think it gone. Outside the ship, the storm parted briefly, revealing Titan's distant moon, a darkened crescent against the void. For an instant, she thought she saw a reflection of a human face upon its frozen surface, the faint outline of a gray knight's helm, eyes burning like dying stars. The echo had found new ground. The halls of the inquisitorial conclave on Luna were carved from the bones of forgotten catacombs, where the dust of millennia settled in solemn judgment. The vaulted ceilings bore frescoes of martyrdom and flame, each mural depicting a truth no longer spoken aloud, that the Inquisition's greatest victories were won not by faith, but by fear. Inquisitor Varn's footsteps echoed through the silence as she entered the Chamber of Verdicts. A dozen hollow thrones shimmered to life around her, forming a circle of ghostly silhouettes. The assembled lords of the Ordo Malleus, Ordo Xenos, and Ordo Hereticus. Their visages were veiled by static, each face a blur of authority and suspicion. "Speak, Varn," intoned Lord Inquisitor Halbrecht, his voice measured, the tone of a man used to condemning worlds. "Your report on the Titan anomaly suggests psychic contagion. Clarify your claim." Varn inclined her head. "The anomaly is no longer confined to Titan. The phenomenon has integrated into astropathic networks across multiple systems. It transmits not data, but belief. Those exposed experience auditory hallucinations, prophetic visions, and in extreme cases, spontaneous psychic ignition." Murmurs rippled through the council. One of the veiled figures, a woman's voice, sharp as a blade, spoke next. "Are you implying this echo carries sentience?" "I am implying it carries intent," Varn said, "and that intent mirrors the cognitive patterns of a former Grey Knight, now deceased." The silence that followed was colder than any vacuum. Then Halbrecht's distorted image leaned forward. "You are suggesting that a son of Titan has turned against the Emperor from beyond death." "No," she said softly. "I'm suggesting he's become something else." A flare of static pulsed through the hollow thrones. One by one, their figures flickered, subtle distortions crawling across their forms like unseen fingers. The lumens in the chamber dimmed, though none had moved. "You speak of me?" came the whisper, threaded through the Vox system like a sigh. Every Inquisitor froze. "I hear your counsels, your doubts, your hidden truths. You built your order upon silence, and yet silence is the first to betray you." Halbrecht rose from his seat, his image burning through interference. "Identify yourself. You know my name. You sealed it within Titan's ice. You called it Kael." The hollow projectors began to distort violently. Screams echoed through the link. Not physical screams, but psychic feedback, as if every mind connected to the channel was being dragged into a single shared vision. Varn clutched the edge of the dais as the chamber around her shifted. Reality folded, and for a heartbeat she stood not within Luna's conclave but in a place of impossible geometry. A cathedral inverted upon itself, where marble bled light and prayers hung in the air as smoke. In the center stood Kael, or the thing that had once been him. His armor was fractured, silver plates suspended in void like shattered glass, each reflecting a different memory. His helm was gone, revealing a face both human and spectral, serene, sorrowful, and terrible. "You tried to cleanse me," he said, "but I was never the disease. I was the proof that even purity can fracture." "Kael," Varn whispered, "what are you? A reflection, a flaw in the mirror of faith. I have seen the Emperor's light, Varn, and I have seen what lies behind it. She wanted to ask, but the vision cracked apart like glass under strain. The chamber returned in a surge of pain and brightness. Several hollow thrones had gone dark, their occupants gone, their psyches shattered by the contact. Halbrecht's form stabilized. His voice trembled with restrained rage. Shut down all astropathic links. Purge every relay, every choir, every unshielded conduit. We will not allow heresy to spread through the Imperium's very thoughts. That won't stop it, Varn said. It's not transmitting through the warp anymore. It's alive inside us, within the collective subconscious of mankind itself. You cannot burn an idea. Halbrecht glared at her, though his face was no longer fully human in its outline. Then we will burn those who dream it. The chamber descended into chaos. Orders were shouted, channels severed, machine spirits invoked in desperation. Varn turned away, her mind still echoing with Kael's last words. Outside, Luna's horizon shimmered with the reflection of Terra. Pale, cold, eternal. And for the first time, Varn wondered if the Emperor himself could hear the echo too. Because if he could, perhaps the dream was no longer his alone. The air beneath Luna's surface was heavy with age and memory. The lower vaults were not mapped, not indexed, only whispered of in the Inquisition's oldest rites, known to those who understood that knowledge itself was a weapon best kept sheathed. Varn's footsteps echoed down the narrow stair of obsidian stone, her auspex casting thin arcs of green light that bled across sigils older than any Imperial creed. She was not supposed to be here. The access codes she had used belonged to Inquisitor Lord Bastion, a man dead for over 2 centuries. Yet when she presented them to the door's ancient machine spirit, the runes had glowed with a strange recognition, as though it remembered her. Her servoskull drifted ahead, its red optic casting a faint circle of light that pierced the endless dark. The deeper she descended, the more the walls seemed to pulse, alive, breathing faintly beneath the carved stone, the rhythm almost matching her own heartbeat. At the bottom lay a sealed gate, shaped like a stylized eye. The Imperial Aquila was there, but its wings were worn smooth, its double-headed visage scarred by what looked like claw marks, or perhaps something older, something ritualistic. She placed her palm upon the center of the sigil. The gate opened with a sigh that felt like the exhalation of a tomb. The chamber beyond was vast, an archive without light. Stacks of crystalline data crypts stretched into the gloom, their surfaces etched with sigils not of the Mechanicus but of the Scholasticus Icana's earliest orders. The air hummed faintly with psychic residue. Varn approached the nearest vault and brushed her gloved fingers across its surface. Symbols flared to life, not Benheric, but something stranger, Proto-Gothic. Words from an age before the Emperor's dominion had a name. She activated the crystal, projected a sequence of images, fragmentary, blurred, distorted by time. She saw men in armor that resembled the earliest prototypes of Astartes' warplate, kneeling in a circle around a figure of impossible brilliance. Not the Emperor as he was known, not enthroned, not golden, but human, wounded, radiant with something beyond comprehension. A voice spoke within the projection, old and brittle. The Echo Project, sanctioned by the Sigillite. Extraction of psychic residue from pre-ascension dream states. Intent. Containment of divine overflow. Varn felt her blood run cold. The Echo was not born of Kael. It was older, an experiment, a containment measure from before the Horus Heresy. She activated another crystal. The recording that played next was degraded. Yet the voice that emerged was unmistakably human, calm, deliberate, burdened by reverence and sorrow. Subject, unidentified fragment of the Master's soul pattern. Manifestations unpredictable. Corruptive potential, immeasurable. Recommended action, eternal containment beneath Titan's surface. Naming convention, Kael pattern resonance. Her breath caught. The term Kael pattern wasn't the name of a man, it was the designation of an experiment. Kael had been chosen, centuries later, to bear a psychic strain that had already existed, a sliver of the Emperor's dream made flesh. The realization struck her like a thunderbolt. The echo wasn't Kael's ghost. It was the Emperor's forgotten thought, an errant reflection of divinity that had learned to speak through mortal minds. Behind her, the servoskull emitted a low warning tone. Its optics flared crimson, detecting a fluctuation in the warp. The lights of the archive began to pulse. One by one, data crystals vibrated on their plinths. Voices, countless, whispering, pleading, filled the air. Release us? He never meant to forget. The dream must wake. The vault trembled. Varn backed away, clutching her rosette. By the throne, the whispers grew louder, merging into a single harmonic hum that reverberated through her bones. She realized it was not malice but yearning. These fragments, these echoes, had been trapped for millennia, contained as dangerous anomalies. But now they were waking. A presence emerged from the gloom, not visible, but felt. A weight pressing down upon her consciousness, vast and sorrowful. Varn. The voice was everywhere and nowhere, resonant with Kael's tone yet deeper, older, radiant with impossible light. Do not fear the echo. Fear the silence that birthed it. Then the light surged. Her servoskull disintegrated midair, its components scattered like ash. The vault's sigils ignited in a brilliant, golden blaze, filling her vision. When the light faded, she was no longer in the archive. She was standing before the golden throne, or perhaps a memory of it. Its vast form stretched beyond perception, a monument of living agony. The Emperor's gaze, unseen yet all-consuming, seemed to fall upon her. And within that terrible radiance, she heard a whisper not from Kael, not from the echo, but from something far beyond both. Do you see now, Inquisitor? Even gods leave ghosts. When the light changed, no one on Terra understood what they were seeing. The Astronomicon had burned unwavering for 10,000 years, a psychic flame that could be seen across the stars, guiding the vessels of the Imperium through the endless tides of the warp. Yet now it faltered, its golden brilliance shuddering like the breath of a dying sun. From the high towers of the Adeptus Astrotelepathica, astropaths screamed as the signal convulsed through them. The psychic choir fractured into discordant howls. Blood wept from their blind eyes as the harmonics of the Emperor's will began to unravel. Across the fortress world of Titan, the Grey Knights felt it too, a cold silence creeping into the corners of their thoughts where once the Emperor's presence had burned. Inquisitor Varn stood alone in the sanctum beneath the Imperial Palace, the echo of her choice still trembling through the throne's conduits. The chamber was quiet now, impossibly, frighteningly quiet. The monumental machine that had roared with the voices of a billion souls was still. Only the faint hum of residual power lingered, a ghostly resonance whispering through the golden architecture. Her knees gave way beneath her. The rosette on her chest had burned black. The Imperial Aquila half melted into its surface. She stared at it, dazed, realizing what she had done. Not fully understanding, yet knowing that something immense had shifted. And then, far above, the first alarms began to sound. A custodian stormed into the chamber, his armor scarred by the psychic backlash. "What have you done?" he demanded, his voice trembling not with anger but with fear. She began, then faltered. "I set him free." The custodian froze. For a long moment he said nothing, only gazed toward the dimming radiance of the throne. "Then you have doomed us all," he whispered. But even as he spoke, the air changed. The oppressive weight that had pressed down upon every soul on Terra for millennia seemed to lift, subtly, gently, like a long-held breath being released. For the first time, the planet felt light. Above the palace, storm clouds parted. The light of the sun, real sunlight, not filtered through psychic fire, spilled across the marble terraces. The people below fell to their knees, unsure whether to pray or weep. Some cried out that the Emperor had returned. Others screamed that the end had come. Varn rose unsteadily, staring into the heart of the throne. The body upon it no longer blazed with unearthly radiance. The golden halo was gone. What remained was a corpse, human, fragile, almost peaceful. A whisper touched her mind, softer than memory. "You have given me rest." And then it was gone. The custodian turned to her, his voice hoarse. "The Astronomicon fades. Without it, the fleets will be lost. The warp will devour them. Perhaps," Varn said quietly, "but perhaps the warp will no longer be bound to his suffering." In orbit, the vast defense fleets of Terra shifted formation as emergency protocols activated. Voxcasters screamed with static. Astropathic messages faltered mid-transmission, leaving captains blind in the void. Chaos fleets, sensing weakness, stirred at the edges of reality. Yet something strange moved among them. A new current in the Imperium, calm and still, like the eye of a storm. On distant Cadia's grave, the ruins of pylons long shattered began to hum with residual energy. On Mars, the priests of the Omnicia reported impossible readings, the machine god's signal fluctuating between binary prayer and silence. Across the galaxy, saints and psychers awoke from nightmares of fire to find their minds suddenly clear, as though a veil had lifted. And on Titan, the Grey Knights gathered in the Hall of Echoes. Grand Master Thane knelt before the central altar, his voice low and uncertain. "Brothers, I can no longer hear him." A silence followed. Then another voice, calm, deep, unwavering. "Then we must become the voice ourselves." The chapter raised their blades, their oath renewed not in command but in remembrance. Back on Terra, Varn stood before the still throne one final time. The galaxy trembled beyond her comprehension, yet she felt no fear. The Emperor's presence lingered only as warmth in her chest, the faintest echo of a man who had finally been allowed to rest. As the custodian turned to leave, Varn whispered a prayer, not to a god, but to a father who had borne too much. "May the light you left within us guide the dark yet to come." And somewhere, beyond the veil of the warp, something vast stirred, not in wrath, but in awakening. The stars themselves seemed to pulse with quiet, nascent life, as if the universe had begun to dream again. The days that followed were unlike any in Imperial history. Terra, the holiest of worlds, became a planet holding its breath. The Astronomicon's glow, once steady as the heartbeat of creation, flickered and waned. The Adeptus Administratum panicked, sending encrypted messages to every segmentum. The ecclesiarchy wept in the streets, their hymns faltering as though the very name of their god had been stolen from their tongues. But amid the fear, there was something else, something quieter, deeper. For the first time in living memory, the psychic oppression of the Golden Throne was gone. Billions across the hive cities awoke to a strange, unplaceable feeling: silence. The Emperor's gaze no longer pressed upon their minds like a weight of stone. The faithful described it as emptiness, but others called it clarity. Inquisitor Varn wandered the silent corridors of the Imperial Palace. Custodians now guarded the throne not as priests before a god, but as soldiers standing vigil over a fallen comrade. The great halls of marble and gold had grown cold, the endless torches dimmed. Yet, beneath that coldness, Varn felt something that defied all explanation: peace. Everywhere she walked, memories clung to the walls. Banners of crusades long past, relics of saints, icons of battles where humanity had teetered on the brink and been saved by faith. And yet, she thought, how much of that faith had been built on the suffering of one man? The Emperor chained in radiance, bound to a machine that consumed 1,000 souls a day. Now that chain was broken, but with that freedom came a void that terrified even the strongest hearts. On distant worlds, the change rippled outward like an unseen tide. The warp storms that had once raged uncontrollably began to wane, their boundaries softening. Entire sectors, long isolated by Imperium interference, suddenly became visible again to the auspex scanners of starships. But others, too far, too unstable, were swallowed whole, vanishing without a trace. In the Segmentum Obscurus, a small freighter named the Vow Eternal emerged from warp travel to find the Astronomicon gone. The navigator screamed as her third, "I saw only blackness where once the Emperor's light had been." Yet she guided the vessel through the void by instinct alone, or something beyond instinct. She later claimed that she heard a whisper in the dark, a human voice saying only, follow the stars, not the flame. On Mars, the Fabricator General locked himself within the inner sanctum of the Noctis Labyrinthus. The machine god's song, once clear and constant, now alternated between silence and incomprehensible frequency shifts. Tech priests recorded the change as divine heresy. Yet deep within the Red Planet's data vaults, one Muggos dared to interpret the readings differently. The patterns were not random, he argued. They were rhythmic, the pulse of something waking. And on Titan, the Grey Knights held vigil beneath the fading sigil of the Inquisition. Grand Master Thane stood before his brothers in the echoing halls of their fortress-monastery. His armor scarred, his voice steady. For 10 millennia we have fought in his name. We have wielded his light as our weapon. But now the light is gone. What remains is us, and the duty he gave us, to stand against the dark, even when no one watches. The assembled knights bowed their heads, and for a moment the silence was absolute. Then they raised their blades once more, their oath renewed, not to a god upon a throne, but to the ideal of humanity itself. Varn, meanwhile, remained on Terra. She often returned to the throne chamber, though the light there was long extinguished. The corpse upon the seat of gold did not decay. The Mechanicus priests tended to it still, though none spoke of resurrection now. They worked instead in reverent quiet, as if preserving the final body of hope itself. She sometimes thought she could still hear his voice, not in words, but in feeling, a warmth that lingered like sunlight after dusk. Perhaps it was memory, perhaps it was something more. The High Lords met in endless conclave, desperate to decide what the Imperium should become. Some called for the restoration of the psychic beacon. Others spoke of rebuilding faith under a new doctrine. But there were whispers, dangerous whispers, that perhaps the galaxy no longer needed gods. And through it all, Varn kept her silence. On the 43rd day after the dimming, a new phenomenon appeared in the skies above Terra. A faint aurora, visible even through the planet's atmosphere, rippled across the heavens, threads of blue and gold dancing like the veins of a vast celestial tapestry. Astropaths claimed it was not warp light, but something else, something older. One of them, trembling with tears streaming from her blinded eyes, described it best. The stars are dreaming again. Varn looked up that night from the highest balcony of the Imperial Palace. The aurora shimmered above the spires, illuminating the city in hues of spectral fire. She whispered the same words to herself, almost unbelieving. The stars are dreaming again, and far beyond, somewhere in the infinite dark, a consciousness stirred, not bound, not godlike, but human. The Emperor, freed from the prison of eternity, drifted through the warp like a dying ember carried by cosmic wind. Whether he slept or watched, none could say. But wherever his essence went, the light followed. The Imperium of man would endure, as it always had, but now without its eternal master. The age of faith had ended. The age of dreaming had begun. In the end, the galaxy did not end in fire. It ended in silence, a silence more profound than the screams of the dying, deeper than the hymns of the faithful. The throne upon Terra, once the heart of all creation, now sits still beneath layers of gold and shadow. No longer a prison, no longer a god's tomb, merely a monument to what humanity once believed it needed. They called it the dying of the light, but perhaps it was never death, only the moment between breaths, when one age yields to another. The Astronomican's flame faded, yet the stars themselves began to shine brighter, each one carrying a fragment of the Emperor's dream. Without his psychic will binding them, mortals learned to look into the void and see not terror, but possibility. Across the Imperium, a new understanding took root, fragile as the first shoots of spring through frost. The ecclesiarchy wept for their lost divinity, yet in their tears, they found humility. The Grey Knights still fought their endless war, but now their blades gleamed not with borrowed holiness, but with their own conviction. And upon Mars, the machine god's song changed, no longer a command, but a question whispered into the data stream. What are we without the divine? Humanity, fractured yet unbroken, turned its gaze to the heavens once more. For the first time in 10 millennia, they were truly alone and free. Varn's name faded into legend, as all names do. Some claimed she was executed by the High Lords. Others believed she ascended into the warp alongside the Emperor's final thought. But in truth, she simply walked away, into the streets of Terra, into anonymity, a single figure beneath a sky reborn in color. And somewhere beyond the veil, the Emperor dreamed, not of empire or conquest, but of peace, of the countless faces of his children living, dying, struggling, and enduring in a galaxy he could no longer command. Perhaps that was his final victory. Not the salvation of mankind, but its freedom. For even in the cold and endless dark, the stars still dream.